Hello, anxiety busters. Rich here. I just thought I'd jump on to give you just do a quick call or chat, if you like, about anxiety. And one of the questions that I think crosses people's mind at times, particularly if they've suffered from anxiety, is uh, what's its purpose? It might seem a strange question, but if you look at today's society, I do use the terms. We are living in an epidemic of anxiety, right? There's no shortage of stress and anxiety in today's society, which on the one hand makes no sense, right? Because let's face it, if you're living in the UK, or maybe Western Europe or elsewhere in the world, a lot of places are relatively safe, right? They're probably living in the safest period of history that we've ever been in. Now, I'm not saying people don't go through individual traumas, and sometimes people don't have the best living arrangements and so on, and they can be at risk. Of course, they can, but generally across the population, and particularly a lot of people who are experiencing anxiety, um, life's okay. So where does this anxiety come from? What drives it? What's its purpose? So let's think about this just for a moment in evolutionary terms. I'm here today. I'm in my office. I am approximately. I'm going to claim I'm 5'7". Probably not quite 5'7". Probably a little bit less than that. I'm not particularly quick at running. Never have been. I used to be able to run for long periods of time, but don't have the right short twitch, explosive muscle fibers to run quickly. So how can this be when I'm meant to be the peak of human evolution, right? In 2025, you know, all evolutionary roads lead here, and here I am, but I'm only 5'7" at a push and can't run particularly quick. Well, the reason for that is purely down to anxiety. Might seem a bit odd, but if you think about my ancestors, while they're out hunting and gathering, they might have just caught something at the corner of their eye that might have been a risk to them, and they would have had this overwhelming sense of dread. The anxiety kicks in, and they're either going to keep very, 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 very still, or they're going to run very, very quickly. But because of the anxiety and the hormonal response to that, the adrenaline pumping and everything else, they'd be able to run much quicker or hit much harder than they normally would be able to. And if anyone's ever experienced an adrenaline rush, you might find that during that period you're able to do things that you couldn't normally do. Um, so think about that for a second. If anxiety is really just a warning system, what's going on? Why do we? For a lot of us, we're living in a relatively safe society. Why are we experiencing so much anxiety? So I guess to kind of answer that, I guess we could probably ask ourselves a very basic question: when should I experience anxiety? Well, the obvious answer is when either I am or my loved ones are in kind of immediate physical danger. Okay, it's a fairly basic answer, but you could extrapolate from there. There are other situations, people have family members who suffering from illness and so on. Is this stressful? Is this anxiety inducing? Yeah, of course it is. Of course it is. But how often are people experiencing anxiety when none of this is going on? And the answer to that question is quite a lot. Um, do I work with clients who've um, experienced a lot of emotional trauma? Yeah, but an awful lot of them haven't. Here they are, struggling with their anxiety. So if you think about, the purpose of anxiety, it's a warning system. Okay, and this is why when people try and keep a lid on their anxiety and they try and fight against it, the warning gets louder. Okay, and actually it becomes counterproductive. And the more people wrestle with their anxiety and try and control it, generally those symptoms of anxiety get worse. Which makes sense, right? Because don't forget, it's an alarm system. It's your own internal warning system that there might be something not quite right. Might be some danger. I'll give you a different example with it. If I think about my dogs, one of them's called Buddy. He's a Labrador. He's 40 kilograms of Labrador. He's really full 40 kilograms of mush. But he, might be lying on the bed at night. And maybe my next door neighbor, comes back late and they bang their car door. If he barks, which he sometimes will at that point, that bark is you think about the purpose of that bark, it's just a warning. He doesn't really understand human society because he thinks, me being the biggest male in the house, that I must be the leader of the pack. I'm sure Sarah would fully agree with that, or me either, really. But you get the idea. He's a dog, so he thinks, oh, biggest male dog here, it's him. I better warn him. So if I shout at Barry to shut up because it's 2 o'clock in the morning, invariably he just barks louder and a lot more. Um, if I say it's all right, Barry, it's okay, good boy, no worries, settle down in a nice, soft and gentle voice, invariably he will. He might have one more bark, but invariably he will, right? So with the first way I handled it, where I shouted, he's probably thinking, well, maybe I'm raising the alarm now, or he's just picking up on the fact that I'm a little bit more agitated and stressed, or quite possibly he's thinking I'm not paying attention to his warning here. I haven't paid attention that there's some potential danger outside. You haven't paid any attention, so I better bark louder. And that's a little bit like our psyche. Okay, we start to experience some anxiety. We start to try and grapple with it, and the more we grapple with it, and the more we try and keep a lid on it, and the more we try and contain it, the worse it seems to get because we've not really acknowledged the warning. I hope that makes some sense to you so far. It's a slightly abstract concept when we think about anxiety. If I ask myself, well, when was the last time I was in immediate physical danger? Um, it was probably quite some time ago. It does happen. Um, Sometimes down to me, my own stupidity. I'm of that, I'm a middle-aged bloke who likes to do a bit of DIY, and maybe sometimes I shouldn't be left near power tools, but maybe that's not my strong point. But other times, I can think of an experience 7, 8 years ago on the motorway in the car, and a car in front of me went into the central reservation, got stuck there, and I managed to move out the way and avoid it. But yeah, it was pretty close. So that would have been, I'm sure if you'd have measured my heart rate then, it would have been, quite high. I'm sure I would have been, I'm pretty sure I was experiencing some level of anxiety. That may all make sense, right? It's what we would expect. But generally, society is quite safe. And if you think about what's really going on, is how we have learned to process things and process experiences. We start to create lots of false alarms. I think, in today's society, people's psyche reminds me of the 1980s, for those who can remember it. Maybe not all of you are that old. But in the 80s and early 90s, car alarms were a nightmare. They were rubbish because you'd have car alarms going off all the time, and it might be, someone's walked past a car, someone's touched the car, there's been a change of air pressure, there's an insect in the anything, right, would set these car alarms up. I don't believe anyone ever, if they hear a car alarm, would have thought during that time period, "Oh, I must go and check my car because my car might be being stolen." I could be wrong, but these things would go off so often. It'd be one false alarm after another. And that's what it reminds me of today with people's anxiety, where we've learned to process things in such a way that we create a lot of the anxiety. And in doing so, once we've created it, we often then try and grapple with it, keep a lid on it, fight against it. And of course, the anxiety gets worse because the warning gets worse. So, top tip for today then. If you are experiencing some anxiety, it can be helpful to try and recognize what it is, what you've been thinking about that creates that anxiety. And if you can do that, that's great. But even if you can't, just acknowledge it. Okay, give yourself a pat on the back. Well done me for recognizing it. It's all right. Thanks, anxiety. Give it a name if you like. Call it Buddy. I don't know, whatever you like. Thanks, Buddy. I've got it covered. Okay? And if you acknowledge your anxiety, what you'll find is it'll start to dissipate. And it's a much more effective way of not becoming a kind of victim to the anxiety and the anxiety cycle where we get stuck in it. And we're, like I said, we're trying to wrestle with this anxiety. In a lot of cases, it doesn't make much sense to us. But actually, if you pay attention, you're thinking it might, because we might have just had, some thoughts about a specific topic that start to make us feel a sense of angst. But even if I can't recognize those thoughts and acknowledge them, I can just acknowledge the anxiety. Thanks for the warning. It's all right. I've got it covered. And if you try that, you'll find that your anxiety will start to, reduce rather than become exaggerated as we grapple with it and fight with it. That's about it for today. I just wanted to pop on and just cover this. It's an interesting topic. Um, because and for those of you working with anxiety sufferers, will you work with people who've got good reason to be anxious? Yes, you will. Will you work with people where there's no logical reason why they're suffering from anxiety? Most definitely. Okay, and it's about understanding really what's going on in terms of some of these processes, and we will go into more and more depth in other sessions. And I've got a 3-part video series, and I've only done one part of it, released it, so I will be getting the other 2 parts that out again, which will make more sense in terms of how this kind of whole process works that we go through, where we help people resolve and overcome their anxiety. But that's it for me today. I'm trying to keep these videos short so people have time to consume them and digest them, rather than bang on about this stuff for hours, which I can easily do. So that's it for today. I'll hopefully see you soon. Many thanks. Bye.